What's going on? It's Kevin with Optimize Essentials, and today I want to share with you the common sources of back pain. And it's going to be a multiple part series. I'm going to be covering different pelvic tilts and other sources of back pain. So if you're experiencing back pain, you want to make sure you take a look at all of them just to have a better understanding of not just of your body, but how bodies work, and potentially if you fall into one of the other categories. And yes, so the very first one I'll be covering today is anterior pelvic tilt. Reason being is because anterior pelvic tilt is very, very common in today's society. A lot of people think they have it. A lot of people think it's a problem. And if you haven't seen my ultimate guide to anterior pelvic tilt, you want to make sure you check that out, because I go into very deep detail into what it is, why you have it, all of the muscles and dysfunctions that are associated with it, which I'll go into today too. I'll go into a little bit more detail in terms of the mechanics, but in the ultimate guide I go into the general, it's a wide range of why, what happens, or what it is, why you have it, and what you can do about it. In this one, I'm talking more about like the nitty-gritty details of exactly what's going on. So I'd recommend watching both of them just so you can have a really solid understanding of anterior pelvic tilt, because there's a lot of controversy, there's a lot of different theories, beliefs, and I'm simply sharing my own that I've done over probably many years of research. And the reason why I'm also making this video is because I personally have anterior pelvic tilt myself, and I wanted to kind of give my take on it so that it could potentially help you. So with all that being said, I just wanted to also say that lower back pain is more commonly associated with posterior pelvic tilt, all right? Posterior pelvic tilt is the opposite of anterior pelvic tilt, which basically means instead of your butt flipping forward, your butt tucks under. Lack of lumbar lordosis, or lack of a lumbar curvature, lordotic curvature in your lower back, is what research has found to be more of a leading cause of back pain. And I want to get a little bit more into detail into that, and also why some people don't believe lordosis is caused, or hyperlordosis is caused, by the psoas and whatnot. So if all this sounds kind of out there for you, I assure you it won't be. Once you get into it a little bit more, and once you understand it a little bit more, you'll have a clear understanding what's going on. And I'm assuming that because you're watching this, you might have had prior exposure to this information before, so it shouldn't be too bad. All right, so let's get right into it. So very first thing, all right, so the main problem that people have when it comes down to anterior pelvic tilt is compression and shearing, all right? Those are the two main complaints. Those are the two biggest problems when it comes down to anterior pelvic tilt. Now, what is compression and what is shearing? If you don't know what compression is, to compress, say this is your spine. So what happens is, let's say this is in between that space is a vertebra, right? Like your disc. When it's excessive compression squeezes that disc together, right? And then you no longer have a healthy curvature because it's compressed. And then shearing is when these two slide. So let's see the best angle to show you this at. Basically it slides like that, all right? So it pulls and then it slides. So you don't want compression or shearing. If you get both, then that's where most of your pain and complaint comes from, all right? So the next thing we want to talk about is, give you guys a better angle to see this all. Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about is what has caused it, right? What has caused the compression and shearing? Well, the inhibition and facilitation of certain muscles. If you haven't watched the ultimate guide, I mentioned that our pelvis structure, what we were born with, we have a genetic disposition to anterior pelvic tilt. Now, research has shown that, there's different angles, there's different pelvic sizes, there's different pelvic structures, which basically helps tie this in a lot better, right? Because your pelvis, let's say, is more prone to anterior pelvic tilt, that also means certain muscle structures, your muscular structure is not necessarily more prone to anterior pelvic tilt, but it's built in a way that if you have a greater inclination towards anterior pelvic tilt, when it becomes dysfunctional and excessive, so when the muscle becomes excessively underactive or overactive, then it becomes more of an anterior pelvic tilt. And that's when it becomes dysfunctional and excessive, which leads to compression and shearing, right? So now I want to get into a little bit more detail of the exact muscles that are causing that compression and shearing. And if you've looked into any resources behind anterior pelvic tilt, you know one of the biggest things that people say are the hip flexors, right? Now, based on all the research that I've done, I'm going to share with you my take on it today. And I hope this gives you a better understanding of anterior pelvic tilt, all right? So hip flexors, a lot of people think it's just your psoas, but it's more than your psoas. There's a lot of different muscles associated with the hip flexors. However, I'm going to start with the psoas because that's probably one of the best muscles to explain potentially why you have back pain, and then we'll go into all the other secondary. So primary is the psoas, all right? So the psoas, people say iliopsoas, which is comprised of your iliacus and your psoas major, but most people know of the psoas major. So here's the tricky part. Here's where things get kind of interesting, all right? So your psoas major connects from your lower back. So there's two different fibers. There's one that's anterior, which basically means in the front of the lower back, that connects down to the hips. And then there's an anterior, right, which connects to the posterior, which is a little bit further behind. So you can imagine that these fibers just running down like that, all right? This is your psoas major. So there's one above, higher up on your lumbar spine, and then there's one lower on your lumbar spine. So there's the anterior and posterior fibers of your lordotic curve. So I'll explain to you why this is important in a second, but also want to cover the rest of the muscles. Now, another key muscle that you want to pay attention to is your TFL, right? So the TFL is kind of this rectangular, triangular-ish muscle that's very in front of your hips. And this connects to this bad boy over here, which is your IT band, all right? Your IT band, and then also part of your glute medius, which is way out back here. Let's just say this is your glute medius, and that connects over to, let's use all these markers, that connects over to your IT band too, basically. So your glute medius, your TFL, all this connects to your IT band. What usually happens, oh, there's a few more muscles, my bad, getting ahead of myself. And then now we have the rectus femoris, which is the front of your quads, all right? Rectus femoris, and then parts of your vastus lateralis, that all connects into your hip flexors. And then the front inner thigh is also your adductors, which is part of, people classify it as a flexor of the hip. However, I'm not going to get too much into that. I just want to cover the main hip flexors, which are the psoas major, the TFL, the vastus lateralis, and the rectus femoris. Now, if you think about it, if this shortens, all right, if this shortens because you're sitting in a flex position, so here is the front of your hips, here is your belly, all right? So you're sitting down and all this is flexed, all right? So all these muscles in the very front of your hips are shortened. Shortened, all right? Tight. When you sit in this position for a long time, you get up, your muscles has adapted to being short. And then as a result, what happens is when you're standing, because all these muscles have been shortened, they physically tilt your pelvis forward. And if you're more inclined to have an anterior pelvic tilt, then it just makes your anterior pelvic tilt worse. And then also, what I want to get into now is the underactive muscles. All right, so the muscles in the front of your body, which is most notably your abs, your core, your rectus abdominis, the intrinsic stabilizers of your core, your TVA, which is this muscle that wraps around your lower back too. When these muscles are just sitting there and your belly is just plopped out like that, because you're not really, when you're sitting, you don't really have to engage your core. So the belly, the core just basically plops out. And then when you're sitting on your ass all day, these muscles, your glutes, get weak. They basically shut down. Same with your core. So these muscles help, if you can imagine, if they're tight and strong, if these become active, what happens? Well, this will pull up on your pelvis. Your TVA will literally pull up on your pelvis. Your butt will pull down and stabilize and neutralize your pelvis. So when this isn't working, your butt, and when your core isn't working, now these active muscles, the overactive muscles, have hijacked the system in a way where it tilts your butt forward and causes these two muscles to not be able to do their job because they're just stealing most of the work, so to say. Now here's where things get a little bit more tricky and a little bit more in depth. Most of the research that you'll find online will tell you that the psoas has the potential to flex the spine and also to extend the spine. So if you want me to clarify, I'll explain what I mean by that, all right? So to extend, which means pop up, think erection, extension, you want to erect, all right? So to erect basically means that your butt sticks out even more, right? Erect is what lumbar lordosis is. And then flexion is when your butt tucks under. So how can it be possible that the psoas has, the hip flexor has the power to flex the spine and also extend the spine? It's because there's two different fibers within your psoas. And then this ties back to my genetic predisposition. How some people can sit all day and develop posterior pelvic tilt, and while others who sit all day can develop an anterior pelvic tilt. Who's right? Who's wrong? Why can't they be both correct? The most of the controversy lies in that back pain isn't associated, like lordosis doesn't necessarily cause back pain. That's where the things get tricky. What does cause back pain though, which I'll help like dispel all of those, is the psoas major pulling down. It may not necessarily create lordosis, like it might necessarily create an excessive curvature. There's another article that I found that it doesn't exactly create an excessive curvature. It pulls down on your butt, so it flexes your spine and then instead of extends it. And then because of that, it pulls down on all the vertebrae and makes it literally flat. And it creates the appearance that it's becoming a hyperlordosis. So there's cases where instead of it curving, that what people think it's like it's curving into a hyperlordosis, instead it's just pulling straight down on the spine, compressing all these discs, so compressing all these discs, and it makes the appearance that you have a lordosis, but when actuality your lower spine, your lumbar spine is just flat, but at an angle that looks like lordosis, which causes a lot of back pain and makes people think that they have an anterior pelvic tilt, but in actuality it's just like a really flat lumbar spine, but because your genetic predisposition is gravitated towards an anterior pelvic tilt. Does it make sense? Cool. All right, let's see if I didn't miss anything. So overactive muscles are the hip flexors, underactive are the core and the glutes. Now all of this is exacerbated by excessive sitting, and then if you excessively sit, you don't exercise, you don't activate the muscles again, you don't stretch it out so that they can stop being so facilitated, so that you can engage your butt and engage your core through stopping reciprocal inhibition. Because if you don't release or stretch the muscles there, these are never going to turn on to its fullest potential. And then another thing is footwear. Footwear is a very, very important part of this process, because when you have very tight calves or when you wear high heels, so ladies, if you are wearing high heels, all that is driving up on your kinetic chain and literally squeezing your butt and creating an increased curvature in your lower spine, which I forgot to cover on the back. Your lumbar erector is really tight, but I'll go into that to a little bit more detail. So that shoves everything up your kinetic chain, literally tilts your butt back, hyperextends your knee, and compresses your back even more. And if you look at most athletic footwear nowadays, they have really thick heels. And if you haven't seen my video on the dangers of tight calves or how to assess them, you want to make sure you check them out on my channel or just look it up and stretch out your calves. Because if you don't stretch out your calves, not only can that create lumbar lordosis or excessive curvature in your lower back, but that can cause different types of rotation in your pelvis if you have pronated feet or if you have duck feet. So all of this can run up your chain and go all the way up to your neck, all right? It's pretty fucking crazy. Anyhow, that's all with the footwear. So you want to make sure you stretch out your calves and wear things that mimic barefoot. All right. Every now and then when I go, or every time I work out, I wear Vibram 5 fingers. Now there's a lot of controversy whether or not they're good for you. Now obviously if you transition to something that you haven't been doing before and your muscles are weak and you're just going right into it, that's how it kind of I started to hurt my feet. But I wear it occasionally towards working out, and then I alternate. So it feels pretty good in my opinion. And then another thing is squatting, right? A lot of us do back squats, heavy back squats. I used to do heavy back squats. If you have a genetic predisposition to anterior pelvic tilt, you have tight hip flexors, weak glutes, weak core, and then you decide to go to the gym and you load your lower back with heavy squats, what do you think that's gonna do to your lower back, to your spine? Compression, more compression. More compression. And then I didn't get to go to the shearing, right? So shearing, how does that work? Well, if your hip flexors are tight, they're going to pull down this way. And if there's nowhere to go in terms of the compression, now it's going to pull forward. So that's how the sliding happens, right? That's how the sliding happens, because the psoas major is strong, so it pulls forward, and that's how you get those discs that slip and stuff, right? Not as common in anterior pelvic tilt, but posterior pelvic tilt. So squatting, I'm gonna make a video right after this on squatting about why you shouldn't squat if you have back squat if you haven't have anterior pelvic tilt. I shouldn't say you shouldn't, why you shouldn't, but I'll bring more awareness as to what you can do to mitigate some of the effects and minimize the damage. But if you're having all these issues, back squatting is the last thing you want to do. You want to make sure you swap it out. I've created a video on the best squat exercise that you want to do, the ones that I recommend giving to my beginner clients to teach someone who doesn't know how to squat. I'm going to post that up, so you want to make sure you check that one out. It's called the best squat choice that you want to implement. It's a lot better for your body overall, and it promotes good posture in the simultaneously. So watch out for back squats because they're not that functional anyways, and they excessively compress your lower back. Whew, now with all that being said, if you decide not to treat this, right? If you keep going living the way you're living, and you don't pay attention to it chronically, let's cover what happens, right? Well, your muscle is going to get strained. Your lumbar erectors, which I didn't get to go into, if you think about it, now that it tilts forward, that compresses your lower back and also your lumbar erectors, most notably your erector spinae, right? When these get excessively tight, they can start to get strained, especially if you're doing heavy squats. And what happens? When your lumbar erectors get shortened, this also runs up your kinetic chain into your thoracic spine, and your body compensates by developing kyphosis. You know what kyphosis is? Kyphosis is rounding of the upper back. So you have kypholordosis. So kypholordosis. That causes rounded shoulders, forward head. If you haven't seen my forward head video on how to fix it, you want to make sure you check that out. If you haven't seen my 4 essential stretches for upright posture, you want to make sure you check that out. That teaches you how to fix your forward head, teaches how to fix your upper body. And then now you want to check out my ultimate guide so that you know how to stretch out and release your anterior pelvic tilt. And then basically that's how you fix your body, guys. You address the issues, and that's it. But let's get back into it. You develop kyphosis. And then if you keep staying there and you still don't pay attention, what happens is you develop postural adaptations. Basically, what this means is your body adapts to that position. It becomes its new normal position. It becomes harder to get into a neutral pelvis. It becomes hard for your body to be in the biomechanically optimal position. It literally gets stuck there, right? The longer your muscles have been shortened, the harder it is to lengthen it. I don't have the exact studies, but basically what happens, I believe it was like sacromeres, but your muscles stay in that position because they've adapted there for so long. So you want to make sure you attack this early on, or else you'll get stuck there and you'll have chronically compressed discs, potentially shearing of the discs, and that leads to nerve compression, degenerative disc disease, also known as osteoarthritis. And all of these pain comes from excessive compression, tight hips, weak core, weak intrinsic stabilizers, weak glutes, and what do you know? All these could be cured if you paid attention to how much you were sitting, what you were wearing, if you're squatting heavily or not, and then dressing on the underactive and tight muscles and underactive muscles as well. And there you go. That is the common source of your back pain. Now, if you don't feel like this is you feel like you have a posterior pelvic tilt, or you might feel like your pelvis hikes up and you have a lateral pelvic tilt, or you might even have a lateral hyperlordosis. So one side tilts up more than the other, then bam, there you go. Even more potential sources. Now you have torsion in your lower back. So you have compression, shearing, and torsion. You have all three, the trifecta. And that is going to be an ultimate recipe for disaster. And you want to make sure you pay attention to each video to really identify all the muscles, all the problems that are going on, so that you can fix your back pain, so that you can restore balance in your body, so that you can start running, walking, playing with your kids, or doing whatever you love. And that is all, guys. Make sure you check out my other videos, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're looking for a workout program, if you're looking for a guide that can teach you how to self-assess your own posture, how to stretch, how to eat right for your body type, how to train properly with good technique, because I'm a Nazi when it comes down to good form, then you want to make sure you check out my 4-week transformation program at optimizeessentials.com. It will lay the solid foundation that you need so that you can live a healthy, fit life and you can optimize your body. So once again, make sure you like, comment, subscribe if you gain value out of this. I'd really appreciate it. You want to share this with your friends who have a Donald Duck butt, meaning their butt sticks out, or they complain about back pain. Refer to them this video. I know it's kind of long, but I assure you it's going to help you if you really understand what's going on with your body. So once again, it's Kevin, and I am out until another day. Peace.